For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, if you have questions for our speaker, you can write them in the chat box, and then Barb will bring up those questions at the end of the talk. So I'm really excited to have John Slapcinsky here with us today. There he is. Okay. So you might remember John because he was our shell show chair last year, not this year, but the year before. He chaired, yeah, I mean, not chair. Did I say judge? I mean, scientific judge, not chair. Okay, I'm losing it. But anyway, he was a judge. Yes. And John studies biodiversity and conservation of land snails, one of the most endangered animal groups. I didn't know that. That's cool. As collections manager of invertebrate zoology at the Florida Museum of Natural History, he oversees one of the country's largest mollusk collections, which supports studies of evolution, ecology, and conservation. So let's welcome John Slapcinsky.
Thank you for a very nice introduction. Do I need to? Okay. Well, it's nice to get to talk here and to be your final talk for this season. And I want to talk to you today about. Can you guys hear me now? Perfect. I want to talk to you today about collecting in Papua New Guinea. So one of the most exciting things that I've done in my career is getting out to some really remote places in Papua New Guinea and discovering new species of land snails. So I want to talk to you today about some of my experiences in the country, show you a couple of nice looking land snails. There are some nice looking land snails. I know not everybody agrees, but there are. And let's go ahead and get started. This is going to be informal. Please interrupt if you have questions, and we'll go from there. So New Guinea is the largest tropical island in the world. It's huge. If you were to put New Guinea next to Sanibel, it would extend all the way to El Paso. So it's 1,500 miles long. So it's a very big island. And it goes from sea level to 16,000 feet. So there are glaciers very close to the equator in New Guinea. So it's a place of amazing differences in topography. It's very mountainous, and it's got a very complex geological history, which has led to it being one of the most diverse places on the planet. And by some estimates, 5 to 8% of the planet's diversity occurs on that island. It's a little sticky. So we all know some of the iconic animals that live in New Guinea. You know, the birds of paradise. People go flocking to New Guinea to see these birds. They're gorgeous and wonderful. There's also really cool birds like cassowaries. So I've seen one of these up close, too close. So I was at a camp that we were setting up. Friends of mine were building the structures that we were going to live in. And I was, of course, in the leaf litter digging around for snails. And I hear this. And I look up, and there is this 6-foot-tall blue-headed bird about 10 feet from me racing straight at me. And these birds have really nasty claws that can eviscerate you. Luckily, we both met eye to eye, and he turned sideways and went the other way. But it's a beautiful bird. So New Guinea sits at the northern edge of the Australian plate. basically it's part of Australia. And within about 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, it was still attached to Australia. So rising sea levels after the melting of glaciers led to the Aral Sea between New Guinea and Australia forming. And the same thing happened on the Sunda area. So that's Malaysia, Indonesia. Those were all part of one landmass attached to Thailand and the rest of Southeast Asia. And rising sea levels separated those areas. But there's still, even during glacial times, there's deep water between Australia and Southeast Asia. So you would expect that the fauna is going to be much more similar to Australia than it is Southeast Asia, and it is. The mammals, you get a lot of marsupials in Papua New Guinea, tree kangaroos. Before I went to New Guinea, I didn't realize there were tree kangaroos. But this is one of the more common, larger mammals in Papua New Guinea. Bandicoots are common, another marsupial mammal, and so are cuscus, which are incredibly cute, fuzzy, not very delicious animals. And of course, there's iconic land snails. Everybody knows the Manus Island tree snail. It's not part of the main New Guinea island, but it's an island just offshore, and it's part of the country of Papua New Guinea, which occupies the eastern half of New Guinea and several island groups to the north and to the east. And most of what I'm going to tell you about today is snailing and land snails in Papua New Guinea, so the eastern half. So New Guinea's had a complex colonial past. It was divided by three superpowers up until not very long ago. Dutch owned the western half of the island. That became Indonesia when Indonesia gained independence from the Dutch. It was supposed to be its own country, but Indonesia didn't let that part of their territory go. So it became part of Indonesia. German New Guinea occupied kind of the north coast of the east side, and British New Guinea, which became Australian New Guinea, the southeast side. And those countries each had their own biologists that did surveys and named species in each of those areas, fairly independent of one another. And luckily, because of the diversity, there's not too much overlap. So we can get an idea that there's about 900 described species in New Guinea and surrounding islands. Oh, is it not? Is that better? I can hold this if that's better. Let's do that. How about the folks on Zoom? Can they hear? Okay, good. So if you look at species descriptions over time, you'll see some interesting patterns here. Almost nothing was known about New Guinea until almost the middle of the 1800s. And that makes sense. There were a few species described as passing boats went through and did a little bit of collecting on the shore when they needed supplies. But there weren't really large-scale expeditions to look in the country until the 1880s. And most of those were by Australian researchers. And you can see these different spikes. This is a research group from Germany. This is a research group from Netherlands and also the Archibald expeditions. So there's a lot of time period where not much is happening, and then you have these expeditions that end up leading to species description. In the 1930s, most of the population of Papua New Guinea was discovered. The largest and most dense populations were in the highlands, and Europeans didn't discover that until the 1930s. So if we don't even know what people are there, we definitely don't know which snails are there. The place has not been very well sampled. So Australia is moving fairly fast to the north at about 7 centimeters a year. And the Pacific plate is moving westward by even a faster margin. I think it's 10 centimeters, yeah. So this is causing offshore islands off of New Guinea to crash into New Guinea. So if you see here, this is the Bismarck Archipelago. That's the island, the big one there is the island of New Britain. If you look to the left, there's the same colored onshore segment. That used to be an offshore island, before a couple of million years ago. So a lot of land is being accreted to the north end of New Guinea. And that does several things. It brings a whole new fauna. It creates mountains. And it does a lot of things that isolate species. And isolation is what leads to speciation in most cases. So each of these little plots of land, each of these mountain ranges can have different groups of species. And that's part of what makes the country so biologically diverse. And if you go there, you can see it. So this is from a trip that we went on the north coast to one of these accreted terrains. And you could see basalt, which is formed at rift zones. You can see siltstone from deep water deposits, and you can see limestone from much shallower water deposits, all kind of mashed together. And here's a map of different terrains on the extreme eastern side of New Guinea. So you can see it's basically a hodgepodge of different bits of land that have been stuck on there. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to try to survey New Guinea. It had been, there were papers out when I was getting started that said New Guinea is basically very poorly known. And that got me really excited. Like, wow, I know they've got really cool papuinas. I know they've got really cool snails, but we barely know what's out there. So I was lucky enough, I had a friend of mine who was a herpetologist who had a grant to survey Papua New Guinea for herps, for snakes, lizards, frogs, those animals. But on his grant review, he got comments that, oh, you should include some other people with other interests. And that's how I got there. I didn't write that review, but I'm very happy for whoever that was. So over a 10-year time span between 2002 and I think 2012, we surveyed 217 sites. We're able to collect 2,600 lots. So when I say lot, when you collect something like land snails, often I'll take sieves and sieve out land snails, and I'll get a dozen of the same species. I'm not going to put a dozen different, one individual in a dozen different jars. I basically group those together as a single species collected at a single place and a single time. So that's what most invertebrate collections do, that just because we don't have the space or the time to deal with the volume that we have. So I have 19,000 specimens from these collections. I was spending more time in New Guinea than with my wife for a couple of years. So it was there a lot. Usually when you go there, you have to spend at least a month because you have to travel there is difficult. You have to set up relationships with the communities that you're going to be sampling and hire people to help you out. And that all takes a lot of time. So most travel in New Guinea is by air. So there are road systems. There's a road system in the capital, Port Moresby, that runs kind of along the south coast. There's a road system in Leh, the major industrial city in Papua New Guinea, and it goes up into the highlands, but the two road systems don't connect. The mountains in between those areas are enormous. In really tall mountains, very rough terrain, very difficult to build roads. So you fly into a lot of places. This Fauna airfield is fairly typical of the type of runway that you have. They're usually just grass runways cut into mountainsides or into forests. And these grass runways, I mean, that's a fairly steep runway. So landing, and it's short. This is a Catholic patient. So if you overrun your runway, you smash right into the mission building. So luckily that slows you down a lot going uphill as you're landing. The scarier part was taking off. For taking off, you just rolled off the side of the mountain and you were up in the air. So, and that's kind of typical. We had other airfields. There was one where we had coming in, there's a 90-degree bend that you had to make shortly before landing. You went through two mountains and then turned 90 degrees. And we had, on the way out, we'd made friends with folks that wanted to trade some of their root vegetables because we were going back to the capital, and that was a good market for them. And so we loaded up the plane with root vegetables. We took off. The stall alarm is screaming. And I know that we have to make that 90-degree turn. And so we make that 90-degree bank, and I looked out my window and there were two wrecked planes in the street. So I'm going to give you kind of little sections of certain trips that we made. I can't do everything. There's too many trips, and I think I would bore you if I did too many repeats. So the first one is this group of mountains here, the Torricelli Mountains. And that is one of those accreted terrains. That's the place that had that jumble of rocks. So we flew into the nearest town that had a small airfield. And then we walked about 10 miles to the base of the mountain that we wanted to collect at. And what we want to try to do when we're collecting, we want as many different habitats as possible. We want lowland habitats, mid-elevation habitats, and the highest areas that we can get to, often cloud forest. So we walked to this village and we stayed here for half a week or a week. And what we want to do is collect the lowlands around the village, meet people, talk to them, tell them what we're doing, assure them that we're not there to exploit resources like gold or other resources, because a lot of places have felt stung by interactions with people where resources are stolen and they don't get much for them. So eventually, after a few days of crawling around on the soil looking for snails, they get the idea that we're not doing anything that's worth anything. So yeah, and then we're also needing to meet people, to hire people to be porters. The herpetologist I went with had a lot of buckets that had to be carried uphill, and we had more stuff to take up. The food that we were taking, we were going to spend a month out in the forest. So we had lots of canned tin fish and crackers. And so we subsisted on tin fish and crackers for a month. When we got to Parkop, we stayed with the Samulcan family. This is them in their Sunday best. I think they were getting ready for church, and the in these rural villages, there's no electricity, running water, or any of those type of things that we've become accustomed to. But you would be surprised how comfortable these villages are to stay in. We stayed with the Simulcans for a week, and these houses are built really nicely. They're up off the ground. The wind goes through them a little bit, and so they're exceedingly comfortable, much more comfortable than the government-built housing in other parts of the country, which is hot and nasty. So this river was the source of our water. Washing dishes, you went down to the river, all those sorts of things you did there. There were these gorgeous cyclodes. This is a operculate land snail that is common in the garden areas in this particular spot. The diet is pretty much all starch-based. So most of what we ate when we were in the village, thank God we didn't have to eat the tin fish, but we got enormous plates of sweet potato. But the sweet potato is not sweet. Everything, the sweet potatoes, the plantains, everything is much starchier than we're used to. If you put one of these sweet potatoes in your mouth, your head implodes and you cannot make enough saliva to swallow it. So you have to drink a little water to get this stuff to go down. And it's really cool that they have old plantains that still have seeds. So these are, bananas with inch-sized seeds, and they are incredibly starchy also, even starchier than the sweet potatoes. Fishing is whatever you can hunt. So your local fish. So in this case, it would be mostly couscous, bandicoot, tree kangaroo. And one of the best things was actually maggots. It's okay. I ate them in the dark the first time. I was like, wow, this tastes like bacon. It tastes like bacon on top of it was not green, so it was like having spinach with bacon on it. Much better than almost anything else. So this is one of my favorite starches. So here this is the trunk of a palm tree that's been sliced in half. It's a sago palm. Once you cut it in half like that, you can open it up and take a hammer and smash the pith, and then run water across that pith and collect it in banana leaves or other leaves down below, and that extracts the starch, and you end up with a jelly ball that is wonderful because it slides down your throat without saliva. So it's something that you can actually easily eat. So we do a lot of sampling of different habitats. So we look in the trees for tree snails, we look on the ground for ground snails. We collect leaves on the ground and sieve them. Stanley here is helping me sieve. So there are leaves in here that have been sieved out, and he's looking for tiny snails in the sievings. And some of the habitats are very particular for certain species. This Crispigibba, pretty decent sized, about the size of a dime. For a land snail, that's huge. This thing only lived in leaf litter that was suspended above the ground. So leaf litter that got caught in vines and in trees. And that's where you would find this particular snail. So we're setting out for Mount Sapau. You could tell this was a long time ago. And when we left, this was a really neat situation. Usually we go to a village, we offer, we hire people to come with us to help us collect and to help us port, to carry things. And in this particular village, for some reason, the entire village came with us, which was really cool. We're like, we can't afford this. We only have this much money. And they're like, we don't care, come with you. And I found out that in this particular place, Stanley, who is doing the sorting, there is there's a belief that a surprise visitor is a reincarnated relative. And I didn't know this at the time, but I was Stanley's reincarnated brother. And I think that's why we got really special, wonderful attention here. It was great. So when we get to the field camps, so we're starting to climb the mountains, we set up basically a lab. In this case, the lab doubled as sleeping space too. And that allows us to sort specimens that we're collecting, preserve them, and take little tissue samples for DNA work later. So that's kind of what the lab setup looked like. And here's a couple of the really beautiful land snails that were in that vicinity. There's Rhynchotrochus. We have a nice Rhynchotrochus somewhere around here. There's one, it doesn't matter. But anyway, there's one over here. Find it. But the Rhynchotrochuses were only up in the trees. They're arboreal. And they were high up in the trees. They were very difficult to collect, except during at tree falls. So they would stay in a tree, even ones that had fallen, a month earlier, and you could pick them out of the canopy of the downed trees. And here's an example of some of the stuff that we were finding in the leaf litter sample. This is about less than a quarter inch in size. And so it went through our sieves and we were able to find it that way. But it's got a really cool pattern of coiling. And then we went to the very tops of the mountains. So this was, this here was some of the cloud forest. So in the cloud forest, it's wet all the time. Basically, you are at the elevation where the clouds are. And so this bit of land sticks into the cloud and is in the cloud almost all the time. And it's very mossy, and the habitat completely different, and the snails are completely different. They're mostly very small and not very attractive, but they're really cool and different. And walking through this, you can walk, it feels like you're walking on sponge. It's very soft because you're walking on moss. And in some cases, you can fall through about 5 feet down and end up at the soil at the bottom of all this moss. This is an example of one of the larger caminids that we saw in the upper elevations of this mountain. This has only been found a few times. So it's it's probably not rare, it's just not collected. It's about the size of about 2 inches. Well, inch and a half, about an inch and a half in size. So on leaving Parkoff, we got the best send-off ever. It was really hard to leave. Stanley's mom hugged me and cried for about 15, 20 minutes. Then his other relatives did. So it was pretty traumatizing. So we're going to move down here to Mount Simpson for the next area, next group of snails. So Mount Simpson is about 9,000 feet tall. And the closest we could get to it was flying into a town called Raba Raba, which is on the coast. So we had to walk 20 miles and 9,000 feet in elevation to get there. And we had met the counselor for the area, and she helped us gain access to this land. She couldn't come with us on our hike up. She had other business to do, but she met us, introduced us to her family, and they helped us walk up to Mount Simpson. And this was the trail to Mount Simpson. This is our party here. These are people. And we walked up this river back and forth, occasionally having to climb up to the ridge and then down the other side as a way of cutting off a bunch of meandering water. And often you would end up having to go across bridges like this. So many areas you had big crevasses that you had to cross. And rather than walking all the way down and then all the way back up, they would cut down a large tree and you would walk across that tree to get there. And some of them you'd look down and was like, I better die. And in those cases, I crawled across. Yeah, I definitely crawled across a few of these. And this is another large caminid found in that area. So this was on trees. So we had walked from Raba Raba, which was basically grassland, up into some valleys, and then up into the mountains that led up to Mount Simpson. And this was down on the trail as we were coming up, just living on the sides of trees. So we stopped at Buniti, is the village that we hired folks, and they're the village that owns the mountain, Mount Simpson, that we went to. So we spent a few days in Buniti, and that's at 1,500 meters. And I'll explain that in a little bit. And there were these gorgeous coleolas. This is a group of snails that's in about 3 different families right now. And being there and looking at them, I can tell that they're probably all the same genus, but they've been split up. Some are taller and have gotten other names. Others are shorter and been called Gainzella, which is found in Japan and other parts of Asia. So it's a real unknown group of snails with several new species. And then there was a nice Rhynchotrochus. So these have really very convoluted lips, and they're usually really dark black. And they make a very beautiful and striking snail. So this is looking from Buniti up to the top of Mount Simpson. So Buniti was 1,500 meters. Mount Simpson is 2,800 meters, which is 9,000 feet. So this is a pretty good elevation gain that we still need to do on this hike. And as we were getting our crew together, a group of angry people came into town, smashed down the fence, broke things in the church, really were furious. And it turns out when we came without the counselor, we went the wrong way and avoided a village that felt left out. And so members of that village came to complain because we were a resource. Almost everything in rural New Guinea is not cash-based, except for education. So for education, you need cash to send your kids to school. And so we were a cash source that they don't get. So they could provide services for us for money that they could then use for schooling for their kids. And so after a while, everything got resolved. Hand shook with everybody. We said we're going to go through that town on the way home. And they actually gave us a really nice dinner sort of thing. Yeah.
they want US dollars?
I think we paid in Kina, the New Guinea currency. So the question was, did they want US dollars? And in this case, no, because it's so uncommon for them to get US dollars. Anyway, we were given a choice. We could walk up this trail, basically go up the waterfall, or we could go the long way. And one of our guys from the Papua New Guinea Museum decided to go the short way up the waterfall. We all chose, abuse us, take us the long, hard, terrible way, because it looked a lot safer than going up that waterfall. So up at the top, we've gained a lot of elevation. So almost everybody in New Guinea has malaria. They've got a version of malaria that insists in the liver. I got to try it out. It's worth trying, and I'll explain that some other time or later. So when people get stressed, like going up to someplace that's much colder than they're used to, a lot of people come down, they get, the malaria comes out of the cyst, and they get an active malarial outbreak. We luckily had medication for that, but it's very, very prevalent. So this is one of the nice views from our camp. We were staying near those, in that forest there, and looking out over that view. So most of the places that we'd been to before this trip were fairly tame and safe and nice. We went to the highlands, which is kind of the Wild West of Papua New Guinea. This is the highlands are attached by road to Leh, and that road is almost unusable because you usually get hijacked on it. So we flew into Tangi, avoiding we flew into a place near Tangi to avoid driving on that roadway. And this picture, of course, isn't the roadway that we were on, but because, of course, there's no snow where we were. But along this road that we were driving on, a lot of the bridges, the decking was borrowed and used to make houses or other things. And so we had to drive a truck across the bridge like that. So you'd have to put a tire on each of the beams and then drive across. I got out of the truck. I didn't. That was pretty scary. So again, here we are. This area had a lot of limestone. This is the Mueller Mountains, and there were enormous sinkholes, just gorgeous places to hike into. We collected a lot of leaf litter. That's what we're doing here. We are sorting through leaves, picking out small snails. Here's a couple of examples of little tiny snails. These pupinas are really cool. They are like glass, and they're slippery. Often you find them not only in the litter, but you find them in logs. So you'll see a giant log, and if you can put your hand all the way into it, you know that it's a good place for these pupinas. Whatever fungi is eating that wood and makes it that soft is a really good habitat for pupina. So yeah. Yes, but not the land snails so much. Most of the snails, I will repeat the question. Thank you. The question was, did natives eat the snails? And for the land snails, not so much, but for freshwater snails, yes. I mean, that is, and green snails, of course, too. but the river snails were often harvested and turned into soups. They shot from the soup. So, yeah. So in the highlands, the neighboring village here threatened to attack our camp, so we had to hire more folks. And this fellow showed up with a homemade gun. That's pipe for water. It's a water pipe, and the breech of this thing was expanded as if it exploded once. So I'm not sure how well it worked, but it certainly was scary. What was scarier were the arrows. It was not a snake. Let's see what it was. He's wearing moss. So like a hat made of moss. Is that? Oh, I think a billion bag. It's a bag. Yeah. Yeah. It's just not. It's not expanded. Yeah. So I asked Mark. He had a bunch of different kinds of arrows. And he had a small one. I said, "What's this for?" He said, "Oh, that's for couscous and people." And then I asked about the next size up. That was for cassowary and people. And then there was a horrible one that had barbs on it that you couldn't pull out once it went in. That one was just for people. So here's some of the snails that we saw in the highland area. And these were very different from what we had seen lower down. Different groups, different genera. That's no perculate on the left side. And then another caminid on the right side. These are a baby nipple size and inch and a half for the bigger one. So we went back after this trip to go back to the airport that we had come from. And there was a small war going on and the airport was closed. So we went instead to this guest house, which is kind of a tourist sort of facility where you could see local culture, which was really cool. So these are the wig men. They've got the just elaborate wig with lots of feathers on it. And so it was a fun way to spend a little bit of time while we waited for the airport to open. This is a student of mine that went on this trip. So in these mainland areas on the main island, so we saw a lot of undescribed species. A third of what we found was new, and clearly new. And then most of them, maybe not most, about 42% had kind of narrow ranges. We only found them in one spot, one mountain. Some were more widespread and occurred throughout the mountain ranges in the mainland part of the region. And very, very few things were introduced. Because there's not that much commerce, there's not that many introductions of things like giant African snails have been introduced, but down in the cities, not so much in these rural areas. So sometime around World War II, oh, I don't like it. So the question was, why are African snails brought here? And it's accidental. It's through commerce. So during World War II, giant African snails were used as food sources on some of the islands. And they also got transported all over the place on military equipment and shipments during the war. And so they ended up in Hawaii, they ended up many Pacific islands, and they ended up on New Guinea. So it wasn't deliberate. So we're going to shift and go offshore. So we're going to go look at some of the offshore areas. These megalocrons are absolutely stunning. These are beautiful snails, and you find them on the islands north of New Guinea. Find them Manus Island, the Bismarck Islands, so New Britain, New Ireland, those islands, and into the Solomon Islands. So Papua New Guinea has a semi-independent territory on Bougainville, which is one of the farthest west of the Solomon Islands. And it has this megalocrons. So we set out to look at the Nakanai Mountains, that right here on the central southeast coast of New Britain. And we went there because there were supposed to be nice tracts of unlogged forest. So we flew into, at the very top, flew into Kokopo. You used to be able to fly into the town of Rabaul, but much of that town was destroyed by volcanic eruptions. Now, Rabaul is kind of dug out and it's a port city, but the airport is still in Kokopo. So we flew into Kokopo, drove into Rabaul to take a boat to this bay here, Jacquinot Bay. And as we drove into Rabaul, it was snowing ash. There was snow clearing equipment clearing off the road so that we could, well, not we, so everybody could use the road. And then when we left, we kind of floated past two smoking volcanoes. And you can see that. We kind of coasted in between those. So it was a really kind of cool sight and just very surreal. When we got to Pomio, at the base of the mountains that we wanted to see, we saw a large number of different snails. That area is almost all limestone. When you have limestone, you often have much higher densities of land snails. It's easier for them to build their shells, so you get really high densities in some places. And so these are a few of the really attractive snails that we saw there. So the question is, they eat the limestone, and they do, they'll rasp on limestone. So snails will kind of, often they're grazing algae or fungi that are growing on limestone, and then ingesting a lot of that limestone. It makes it really easy to make them shells. So unfortunately, we thought this was going to be completely unlocked, but a logging company had gotten there the year before we did. And they had logged much of the lower area near the town of Pomio. And we were still able to find things in the remnant patches of forest. You would see this large land snail on the left, which is about 1.5 inches or 2 inches in size. But that only occurred where it hadn't been burned. Not burned, but cut. And you can see on the trail up the mountain here how badly damaged the vegetation is in this spot. So we hiked past this area and set up camps. We usually stay in a tent like this for a month. We build, well, maybe not we, but folks that we're with who know how to do this better than I do, made these platforms, and that pulls your tent up off the rocky soil and out of the muck. Because after a month, you would just be in a mud pit if you didn't do that. And one day,
All this time that you're collecting land snails,
Yep.
is, the other person that has a grant, are they collecting the
Yep.
frogs and all that stuff?
yeah, so my question was my collaborator collecting the frogs and things, and yes. And each time we'd help each other out. Frogs are easy to triangulate. So what you do is you listen for the sound. You have to have 2 or 3 people, and then you can each person kind of points, I think it's in this direction, and you can hone in on where the frogs are. And this is really important because there's a lot of frogs that burrow under the mud. And so they're calling from a burrow. And those are hard to triangulate. So when I was in my tent one day at this place, the tent started shaking like this. And so I got annoyed thinking, okay, was somebody trying to wake me up or something? I unzipped the tent, stuck my head out, said, what are you doing? And it wasn't them. They looked at me like I was crazy. It was an earthquake. So this area had several earthquakes a day, or at least during the time that we were there. And they were earthquakes you could feel, like, pretty decent. And that's because it's got really complex geology. So the Solomon Sea is being pushed underneath New Britain. And as it's being pushed under, you get limestone that used to be in the bay is getting lifted up, and you get the deepest caves in the world in this area. Really fantastic caves. And then beyond that, you get volcanoes as things melt and come back up. This is a terrible audiovisual, but each of these is a dot that represents an earthquake. So that gives you an idea of how many earthquakes are happening in this area. I guess it would be important to say the time frame we're talking about, that I don't remember. So this is a wonderful truncatella. So truncatellas here, little, small, brown, boring, lived in the rack. These guys are fully terrestrial truncatellas out under the rocks in front of caves. And this thing is inch and a half long. So it's a really big truncatella and spectacular. I guess nobody's excited by truncatella. This one's really nice. They're also outside of some of the caves in these heliconias, in these banana-like plants. You would find Papua. And this is not the same species as the Manus Island green snail. This is kind of the New Britain equivalent of that. Just a gorgeous snail. And then there were nice big brown caminids of good size, 2 inches on the ground, like this guy here. All right, the last set of islands that we're going to talk about are now on the east coast. So we've gone from the north area, now we're in the extreme east. Most of New Guinea is that way. And so we went to the largest of these islands. One of them, we arrived by plane. One of them had an airfield for a time. And, but we couldn't get a plane ride back because we chartered the plane to get out there. And we thought we were going to be able to take a boat to get back. And we found out it was bêche de mer season. So bêche de mer are cucumbers, sea cucumbers. And they're a delicacy in China, probably Japan too. And they bring really high prices. So fishermen do not want to use their boat to take biologists that have no money back to where they came from. Instead, they're going to go get those expensive fetch to mare and make a little bit of money during the season. And so we ended up having to go on the school boat. So this is the school boat at the beginning of the semester. So we rode with like 150 people on this little tiny boat. I am in the middle. You can't see me. I'm in there. I was holding babies, and it was kind of a neat experience. But it was three painful days on this boat. The bathroom was a bucket. Those kids are going to, I don't think they're boarding schools. I think they're national schools. You know, I think they're you're right. They're probably, some of them, I would imagine some of them are probably like religious boarding schools.
Oh, but I actually didn't have to speak at the schools because they're coming to these remote islands, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, do the kids stay at the schools? And they do. So at the beginning of the semester, they take the boat, they go to the schools which are on the mainland part of New Guinea near Allentown in this case, and they board there. Yes. Thanks. So this is one of the larger caminas that found on Mount Russell. So Russell is the furthest east of these islands. And this is a pretty big snail. We saw one of them, and it was way up in a tree. And we couldn't climb up to get it. So we basically sat around and threw rocks at this tree for an hour to knock it off the leaf that it was on and onto the ground, and then took another hour to find it. Pretty big. It's like this. Can you have it? So we went to the summit of Mount Russell, and it was cloud forest. It was very wet, and we saw some of these thin shell things that you see up in the cloud forest area. This group is really cool. These guys, Parapentopsis, they're always bright lemon yellow, and they're about the only thing that's active during the daytime. I don't know what they're doing, but there's something they're doing. I think they're advertising that they may not be good to eat. I mean, here's some other examples of the snails that are up at that high elevation area. So they tend to have very thin shells. Often the mantle covers part of the shell. And they're almost entirely undescribed, and which is fun for me. I think I described that middle one. And they also have these ground-dwelling snails. So these are really hairy. The top two are new species, not named. The bottom one has a name. So obviously size makes a difference on what's known. Almost nothing small from New Guinea is known. Nothing small and native. So in this group of Parapentopsis, the bright yellow guys, 15 of the 16 species. Actually, how many were new? 11 of 14 were undescribed, and well, now they're described. Here's another group of relatively small snails, almost entirely undescribed until a couple of years ago. Again, each of these tends to be a different species on a different island. So there's a lot of endemisms on different islands. This one, let's see if that works. Yeah, it does work. That one there is Patera volans. I named it for flying saucers. So again, we know very little about what's at these places. A lot of the species are new. A lot of them are endemic to single islands. Still a lot to learn in this area. So, if you pick up, what I want you to go away with is New Guinea is extremely diverse for habitat, and therefore really diverse for animals. In my case, snails is what I care about more than anything else. And I guess I didn't talk as much about languages, but there are more languages in Papua New Guinea than anywhere else on the planet. And we would be in situations where we'd be sitting talking in a village, and each person would be speaking a different language, and they would know all of the languages being spoken. And of course, we knew nothing. We knew English, which, because a lot of the areas we visited were former English and then Australian colonies, so people did speak English. So, and then we also went with people from the art museum in Papua New Guinea. It's a natural history museum too, and they would know their local language. Yeah. I haven't been, so the question is, am I still going? And I think the answer is, I wish. The money's run out. I'm older now, and it's a little more difficult, I think, to do this sort of thing. So,
How did you pick your sampling sites?
so sampling sites picked in a number of different ways. Where could we get to? Where did we know somebody in a place that looked interesting to us? So where the overlap of can get to and is interesting, we went there. Yeah.
So how many different species in general were being identified, and were you able to be credited with identifying them?
So how many species were new is the question. And at least 200 species in our samples are undescribed. I've done 20 out of the 200 I have. And hopefully, I definitely won't get them all done before I die.
What are the predators of the snail? And secondly, second question is, did you select them or did you just study them?
Great question. Did you select them? How do you know that they're not the last? So the first question is the first question. What are the predators? What are the predators for these species? So a lot of things. So mammals, many mammals will sail, many birds will sail. In birds that have sail. So those would be some predators, but there are a lot of insects that attack snails. They will, crawl in and start chewing away at the snail. So there's a lot of things that we use the snail. How do we know it's not the last? We are seeing very teeny tiny parts. So we're only getting the small area that we're collecting in. So it's unlikely that we've done much in the way of damage to the population. Yeah. So we'd like to get some photos of them alive, and we want specimens because most of these things, to be able to differentiate it or to publish the species name, you'll need to publish that in fact reproduction of the animal, maybe some DNA from the animal. So you need some of that with your, and we get permits for our research through the national government, the local government, and then we'll provide information to local communities of what we found. And then there's a question here first.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up.
I'm sorry for the Zoomers. I walked away from the podium a little bit. Give me that question one more time. There's so I don't get to name anything after myself. I'd feel kind of creepy about that anyway. But yes, I have a triflora named after me. I have a scorpion named after me that I collected in New Guinea and sent to a scorpion worker. I think there's something else, but I don't remember. A snake. I have a snake named after me that my colleague collected. Yeah. Yes.
Been able to do genomic sampling of some of these snails that we have close to the lake.
So that's embarrassing for me because I've collected tissue samples. Most of this started out before we were doing a lot of genetics work. So, and my expertise is not as much in genetics as it is in anatomy. So I've stored away material, hopefully for somebody in the future to look at. I've used a little bit of genetics, but not much. Yeah, does that answer? Yeah.
The shape and the color of the shell contingent upon the environment in which it's found.
So the question is the shape and color of the snail in relation to the environment? And in most cases, the ground dwellers are all brown. So they're all kind of mimicking the soil and the rotting leaf litter. Arboreal things are much more polymorphic, different color patterns, even within a species. And that's probably a way of breaking up your outline so that you don't stand out as a snail on the side of that tree. You look like a dapple of sunlight or some other texture. Yeah.
How many?
Our goal is not to collect huge numbers because we're short on space. Everything that we take with us has to be backpacked. And so what we try to do is collect a reasonable amount that will allow us specimens to dissect or to provide genetic information. So usually we try to, limit it to maybe 20 of something. It depends. Yeah. In most cases, you just don't find more than one of something. Yeah. We preserved them and brought them back preserved. Yeah, you can't really traveling with live snails. Yeah, you have to get special permits for that. We didn't have those. Carol.
And all the egg hunters.
I think we had dinner with Grandma and Grandpa. Who might have imbibed, but no. Thanks. Oh, wait, I go in. I'll catch you later. All right, thank y'all.
Thank you for the reminder.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John. That was absolutely fantastic. So many interesting things. Is everybody ready for a field trip to Papua New Guinea to try out the, let's see, the weevil larva, the bushmeat, and the maggots? Is anyone ready to try that? You okay? John's ready to go. We might have a couple take the malaria. Yeah, yeah. And the homemade guns and the, yeah, some sketchy stuff, but you're one tough cookie. I want to tell you, good, good.